Hello, everybody. Welcome to Lunch and Lore on Casters and Castles. I'm Tormented by Gnomes, and joining me on this fine Friday is my longtime friend and co-creator of the world of Anacra, NinjaManMat. Matt, how you doing?
Hey everybody. Hi Joe. I'm doing real good. How about you?
I'm doing all right. I am doing all right. It's finally the weekend.
Yes, TGIF.
Yeah, we got your game tomorrow. That's exciting.
That is so exciting. I have so much planned. You guys are gonna die.
Yay!
Not really.
I know, I know. You're a mean DM, but you're also a kind DM, which is roughly where you want to be.
Yeah.
Okay. So, for today's topic, we are talking about an event that has been referenced a few times, mostly on Lunch and Lore. I don't know if it's ever come up directly during the quest for the Book of Dawn, but that is the Fall of Luminias. And yeah, we're just going to talk about that for the whole episode because it's got a lot
Oh,
of
big time thing. Yeah.
ramifications. It ties into like the dawn, the firmament, the sovereigns, the silent city, the dragons of the world before, the infernals. It's kind of a pivotal thing.
And I feel like this is one that you've had in the works for a long, long time. Even before Anacra was the way it was. There was always Luminius. Like there's always a light tower, there's always a girl,
Mm-hmm.
there's always a monster, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And that's been part of your just mega lore for a long, long time. And I feel like as we've been making sure that we fit everything into the puzzle that is the grand scheme of Anacra, you and I have discussed the ramifications of what happens in and around the rise and then fall of Luminius for
Mm-hmm.
quite some time. And I feel like we're going to be covering quite a bit of that today. You're going to be really kind of encapsulating what Luminius is and why it was so important, especially when it fell. And we're kind of going to be doing that thing where I start poking in and figuring out, okay, so because of that, how about this? And we'll be
Mm-hmm.
doing a lot of back and forth, a lot of lore tennis today.
Yes. That's the if we ever move this to the afternoons, it'll be lore tennis. That'll be
Yes,
the rebrand of the show.
yes. So I guess first of all, let's start off with mate. What is Luminius?
So during the Dawn era, which was before the world was divided into four kingdoms, when matter, thought, and energy were all sort of one, the substance of Dawn, there were the sovereigns, there was the laughing god, and there were these creatures. In the past, I was calling them the Tuatha Dé from Celtic mythology. I'm no longer sold on that name. I'm probably
Yeah.
going to work on a new name. I usually just refer to them as minds because they were just, they didn't have
I'm
a
sorry, wait. Mimes or minds?
mind.
Okay, good. Because I'm thinking, whoa, we've got like Dawn mimes. That's insane.
Yes.
That is the ultimate door magic.
Well, that's where they tie into the clowns from Red Sky City. It's
Oh
all
no,
connected. It's
it's
all
all
connected.
connected.
Uh, where was I? Right. So there were these sentiences, these beings, spirits, whatever you want to call them. And the reason it's so hard to pin them down is that during the Dawn era, you could change your own corporeal form just by wanting to, just by building yourself a new body or changing your body from the raw substance of Dawn. So in such a non-biological space, people tended to gather together based on mutual creative ideas, or emotions they wanted to share, concepts they wanted to share, so on and so forth. So you did have cultures of a sort, but these cultures were extremely fluid, just like the entities that dwelt within them. And the geography of the Dawn world was in constant flux. It was easily morphic, but Luminius was a place where a bunch of these children of the dawn gathered together to work together, to create things together. They had ideas for, one person might come up with something, but just like we're doing in this lore jam, you can think of it as like an artist's commune of sorts. But in lore and legend, Luminius is called the City of Light. It was the first big settlement, and settlement is kind of the wrong word, but it was the
Yeah.
first big population center in the Dawn. It was the largest population center in the Dawn. And so you had all these beings capable of shaping reality by their own whim, collaborating together to create bigger and more beautiful things than anyone else could by themselves. There
And this is
were.
especially important in the Dawn realm, the
Mhm.
Dawn Age, because, like you were saying, we had so many different entities that were so not omnipresent and omnipowerful, but definitely very malleable and able to change
Mhm.
the world around them. And it was very interesting that we had a group. of people that not only like how we talked about the elementals, all the different I don't know if we confirmed if the children of the sovereigns were a thing yet, but there absolutely were mm, seconds. There were like the genies and whatnot that were
Yes,
working
genies
on
were
making
absolutely
change.
present during the dawn.
But it's not like the genies we haven't, well, maybe they did have, we haven't discussed it, but I feel like Luminius is supposed to be, if not the first, one of the first, like you said, main kind of cultures. It was where a group of these things
Hmm.
came together and said, hey, what if we all hung out and did this together instead of off doing our own thing?
Hmm.
It was the first group project, you know?
Yes, it was the first group project, but there was no deadline, and therefore it didn't
Yes,
matter who did most of the work.
exactly.
It was, on the creative Minecraft server, you've got people flying off doing their own thing, and then you've got a whole bunch of people being like, let's create a one-to-one replica of Dalaran, the floating city. And this was like that. It was like, hey, let's all work together and build something really cool.
Yeah.
So the legends of Luminius involve things that would be physically impossible to create after the dawn ended. They made towers and spires out of music and vast amphitheaters and chambers of light and glass. It was a place of paradisical wonders that would probably harm your brain if you saw them, but in
Yeah.
like a this is too beautiful for my pathetic human, head meats, rather than these are things that man was not meant to know, and now I must lose 1d6 sanity points.
Yeah.
And the legends are there's all sorts of, like, it is the archetypical pre-Atlantis lost city of myth. And it is lost beyond, like, you cannot go discover the ruins of Luminius because it was of the dawn, and the dawn is over. The dawn is gone. Like, there's little pockets of dawn energy out there, but there isn't really any creations of the dawn left over. So it was just utterly unraveled when the sovereigns created the firmament and set forth the emerald tablets and spun the dawn into the four kingdoms. The other thing is that bad things happened to Luminius. Before, Luminius is most famous for, one, being this place where if there are folks sitting around a campfire, they're probably not telling stories of Luminius because that's, more high scholarly lost lore stuff. But amongst the
That's water cooler talk and Candlekeep, that kind of a
yeah,
thing.
yeah. Like it is much more water cool. That's a great way to put it. But the stories are completely outlandish. Anything you can imagine, people have told the stories. Oh yeah, well, you can't have a fountain of youth because there wasn't really mortality back then, not at least in the aging fashion. But like impossible deeds and beautiful things, you can describe anything you want. It is very possible to make up tall tales about Luminius, because you could literally do the impossible there. So while there are a lot of stories and poems about what wonders existed there, these are mostly found amongst creatures like genies, the Fae, Eladrin elves, certain Alfar, so on and so forth. But for most people, it's this distant idea, like the Garden of Eden. Nobody spends a
Yeah.
lot
Oh,
of
yeah.
time asking what was it like to be in the Garden of Eden. It's more just this concept of paradise, right? It's this thing, if you
Absolutely.
need a quick shorthand for impossible wondrous beauty, you go to that, because one, explaining it is really, really difficult, and two, there's nothing left of it.
I don't want to go too far off track, but you had mentioned the Eladrin, and also I'm assuming the Alfar
Mhm.
would have kind of a connection there. I know that we're going to touch on the Alfar and many of the other elves in later episodes, but do you think there's a chance that something like a tower made of music could have survived even in pieces and been rebuilt in one of those pocket places of dawn that the Alfar tend to congregate and form their cities around?
I think that even in one of those Dawn pockets, it would need more of an anchor than you could have gotten away with in the Dawn world, but something approaching those wonders could exist. So,
So maybe like you have like this chapel made of stained glass, and when the light
mhm,
goes through the glass, it creates this music. You have to have
right.
some kind of an like, even if it is so far out there and whimsical, it needs to have some kind of physical anchor, even if it is in
Yeah,
a dawn pocket.
because those dawn pockets aren't pure dawn energy, right? It's a place
Absolutely.
where the dawn overlaps with the other world or wherever they've set up shop. If you wanted to do a tower of music in one of those places, what I'd imagine is you have these metal chimes, these really tall metal chimes that form the framework of a tower,
There you
and you
go.
can walk up these invisible steps, right? So there is this tower composed of song, and you can experience it, but it's anchored by these physical objects. Whereas in Luminius,
Yeah.
it would just be sung into existence, and now it's here.
It's almost kind of like you have God, I think it would be best like, like the like walls of forest. It's almost like you have walls of forest that are made of music, something like that.
Yeah. So there
That's very
are
cool.
relics of the dawn, and there could be relics of Luminius, but they are few and far between.
And they're probably at this point very much modified or updated to
Right.
basically be patched into the server that is
Yeah,
Anacra.
because they can't exist under the current patch. So they've always got some way to patch them in.
Absolutely. I think that's a great transition to move into who were the denizens of Luminius? What did they do? And was there any kind of class system among the different entities there? Especially considering in the Dawn realm, would they have had, even though they have like a city of sorts, would they have thought of kind of breaking themselves down? You said they were artists. Did they have different jobs that over time took on more or less importance that framed the way that they saw each other?
I want to say it was very, we're an anarchistic commune sort of scenario. There was not a lot of need because.
And I know that like in a lot of Anacra's lore, like, capitalism and colonialism is bad and hippy jippy is the ultimate good. And we all must return back to the forest and
return to monkey.
Install Wi-Fi. Yeah.
But in all honesty, it's difficult to form a hierarchy without resource inequity, right?
Yes.
Social hierarchies form because of social capital and force of personality, but they also form because of resource access. There's no problems with resource access during the dawn. It's a paradise. You can just dream it up. So instead of getting like a tiered hierarchy, living together, they did change each other, and they changed the way that they interacted with each other because they started to form community. And when you form community, you always get specializations, and you get, I don't want to use the word division in a divisive sense, but you get people identifying as this or that or the other. So
categories, probably.
You get categories. So what you would have is there isn't a caste system because nobody's really above each other, but you would have certain dawn denizens who are highly respected, right? Who's like, oh, this person is the most fantastic musician. This person creates emotions. They craft emotions that you can experience, and they do so in a way no one else can. This exceptional individual is going to teach this craft to other people. They're going to form a community with this person in a position of respect and therefore authority. That sort of stuff did happen. And you did end up with a warrior caste of sorts, because one of the arts that was practiced in Luminius was battle and magic. And it didn't resemble anything like it does now, because when you fight, you're not just I swing sword at you, it's I shape reality around you to fight you. But it was because combat and conflict involved force of will, creativity, so on and so forth. The greatest warriors were the ones who it was almost like being a great debater or a great philosopher or a great poet, because it came from the same place.
Yes.
Physicality was from your head.
Especially because battle in Anacra pre-demonic Imperium invasion from the Outer Dark was more like sparring, I would assume.
It was consensual. It was like a form of art.
Because like you said, really, when it comes down to it, warfare and whatnot, it stems from, like you said, the resource need. Either you have a title or a resource or something that I want, and I'm going to take it from you because I can't either get it myself or convince you to share it with me. Whereas, like you said, unless there's some kind of immense specialty, like anybody can do anything in Anacra, at least anything within the span of their brain thing. Like you said, their mind makes it happen. And unless there's something spectacular that you're looking for, that's a good one, then you wouldn't have the need to be taking from one another. But if you did have the need, like I want to prove myself or whatnot, then like you said, you would have these artistic battle forms that take the form of sparring until, of course, bad people arrive and the Fire Nation attacks and everything changes,
Right. It's like, instead of getting into a debate with somebody who, oh, you think neoclassical romanticism is a derivative of this art form? Well, I actually think it has its roots in the Pascal tradition. Have at thee, knave.
Yeah.
And because it was really, really hard to like actually kill another child of dawn, you could absolutely go at it. But it was all about creative differences or conflicts of personality. And it was one of those things where like the denizens of Luminias would have been very heavily into the enemies to lovers trope in media, where it's like,
Yeah,
we're gonna just blast the crap out of each other and argue at each other now, but by the end of the day we'll be, passionately in love, or at least like in harmony, or at least able to coexist again. Because the fact that
absolutely.
there's not a lot of consequences for combat unless you're deliberately trying. Like, it is possible to shoot to kill, but when you have infinity and you have everything, that sort of loss means a lot more, right? It's like, you're not just
Oh yeah.
losing. It's not like, well, everyone's going to die someday, so I might as well sacrifice myself gloriously. It's, no, I would like to live forever like everyone else does. If I die, that is a horrible abomination. So we do not shoot to kill.
So that was actually, I was going to bring up 2 points to that. So I think the first and the most obvious point is, and we haven't really discussed this, death in the Dawn era. What happens when a child of Dawn does perish and the spark of their creation is snuffed out? We
I
don't have
think
the foundry like we do in Anacra, at least in the early stages, do we?
No, I think that they sort of just dissipate back into the dawn. Their energy is discorporated and they become part of the world again. Some guy has a great question: if dawn entities are hard to kill, did they reproduce? I think, yeah. Like, I think that reproduction was possible, but it was almost an act of art because there was no biology involved, right? So if you were going to create a new thing, you would create it from creative impulse. And you could do that with another person, but there was no biological aspect to it.
Also, my thought with the Dawn world was almost kind of like how we've described the underworld or even parts of the other and overworld, in that yes, it had an actual physical space. That's where you could find it. But once you entered it, the laws of of space and time were so
Mm-hmm.
different. Like, you, even if you looked at it and like, oh yeah, this is a very Earth-sized world, I'd like to go conquer this, and then you get there and it's like, oh my god, this thing's way bigger on the inside than it is on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
So space, I would think space wouldn't be a huge limitation, but neither was there, like you said, there's no, there wouldn't be, unless, like you said, there was something creative you wanted to do and pursue, there would be no need to continue creating more entities, because all you're doing is now filling the world that you're already being able to create more in. So it's kind of like that reverse Thanos thing where, like, oh, if I get rid of half the people, then the resources will be fine and all that. It's like, well, yeah, I have a limitless supply of resources, so I can keep creating people. But unless I have a need to, I don't need to continue my family line because I'll never die. The needs that come with reproduction aren't there in the Dawn era like they would
Right.
be
There's
in
no
the regular
biological
world.
clock. Nobody has a reproductive drive. It was one form of creative expression that certain entities of the dawn were inspired to partake of. But it was just like, oh, you're into, creating life? That's cool. I'm into underwater basket weaving.
Yeah. My second question was, and I would assume that this would be the case just because of the very artistic and you know effectively poetic nature that the Dawn world had. But I would assume when you come to interacting in a combat of sorts, like you said, you can change. You're not just fighting. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if you're throwing a punch or trying to blast someone with energy, that's like one of the most basic forms of fighting during the Dawn era.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I would assume that you wouldn't just like collapse, you know, space around an entity and try and throw them into a black hole. It's kind of like if a this is kind of harkening back to our old role play days on the forums online, mate. But when you were interacting with somebody else and you were doing a fight and you just tried to say, "Oh, and I cut your head off," and you die. It's like, no, doesn't work that way. And the role play and the fighting is seen as being better and therefore more acceptable if you find very elaborate and beautifully done ways of being able to actually
Mm-hmm.
get the combat across, have enough of that tennis match of that back and forth, and a good combatant would not be seen by, oh, how much power can you bring to bear to just shut down your opponent, and more so, how long can you draw out this beautiful engagement between the two of you, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, again, if you take it to like a competition between two artists, it was not about annihilating the other life form. It was about proving your point. And by proving your point, it's like, I'm going to fight and my fighting is way more artistic, creative, beautiful, and compelling than your fighting. Therefore, I win. But I'm not going to kill you because death is off. I don't want you to stop existing just because we disagree, which is part of the problem. Before I go off into an aside, I also want to say that there were a lot of other things out there. There were legendary monsters during the Dawn era. And the reason that they were there is because they were sort of part of the Laughing Gods concept for what the world would be like, right? They imagined people living in this world who could enjoy it and make stuff, but it also imagined gigantic monsters for them to fight so that they could tell stories about it. And these were, legendary leviathans who may not stay dead after you kill them, because it's like, oh, there's a concept of this giant leviathan, and if you destroy its form, it's going to reappear. But, what do you want to do? Well, my creative activity is I fight leviathans. That's my thing. That's what I'm about.
Yeah.
And so that's another place where this warrior concept came from.
And because it's the laughing god, we have a god that, like we've said, is about celebration, is about enjoyment, and is about trickery. So you probably have, aside from just battle and great monsters like the Tarasque, or Tarask, or however you want to Tarjay, whatever your pronunciation of that
The
great beast
Tarjay.
is. You likely have ancient, not tombs, but there probably would have been almost like built-in ruins or landmarks, or you know how we've discussed axis mundis in the past, like the very, very tall points in the world, but there would be certain dungeons, as you could put them, where there is, if not loot, but there is some kind of precious thing to be found. Again, not treasure in the sense that like, oh, I need to get this in order to be more important in this world, but like you said, like goals. Some people's goals are to slay great monsters. Some people's goals are to climb to the tallest peaks.
There are things you could, aspirational goals out there.
Exactly.
I
There's
think
tons
that
of aspiration.
I think that in its native form, the Dawn World wasn't saturated with ruins. But if you want to talk about like Dawn World dungeons, you'd say massive natural caves and
Yes.
impossibly tall mountains and stuff like that. And the thing is, whenever you run around these places, you could probably just fly. Like you can say, well, I have wings, and now you have wings and just fly up it. But because the nature of that place is to be challenging, no matter what you do, it's like the DM determined to get a hard encounter out of this, even though you're trying to cheese it. It's like, but the world is going to adapt, because the nature of this place is not to have these physical dimensions. The nature of this place is to be arduous and punishing and test your mettle. So no matter what you do, no matter what tricks you have up your sleeve, your mettle will be tested.
Oh yeah, I mean, you could have an area that you try to, fly up this mountain, and it just stops you from flying, or there are entities that will
huge
come
winds
out
that
and
blow down.
Exactly. There's something that's going to stop you and make you have to, because the whole point of the Dawn era is, with these minds that you discussed, is to make you think, is to make you creative, and more that you can express yourself and to find new ways to overcome your challenges. The greater experience, not like XP experience, I mean like the greater experience and life sense that you're going to achieve. I mean, if you think about it, this world of the Dawn era is kind of just like you said, it's a paradise. It's honestly the Dawn era, when it was first in inception, this world of Anacra, before it was Anacra, was really like almost an afterlife. This would be like somewhere that you would go, and this stories would be told where yes, you can live out your life just slaying monsters and climbing mountains and just having this, what is effectively an amazing adventurer's paradise, full of mystery and intrigue and world building, like literally.
Yeah. And if you think about it, the Dawn world of Anacra was created by the only survivor of an old pantheon who saw every single other god die horribly and saw all this tragedy and just wanted to make something nice, did not want to create a world full of hardship and suffering, wanted to create something nice. The problem is, said god is not alone in the cosmos and is not omnipotent. So we don't have the problem of evil where it's like, well, if the laughing god is omnipotent, why did the laughing god allow evil to exist and suffering? Because the laughing god is not omnipotent. The laughing god is just one creator out of many, 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 many out there.
Especially considering they kind of just got it started and they left others in charge. And we've already discussed how non-perfect the sovereigns of Anacra are. So we don't have a situation where, how could you let this evil take place? I don't really have a say in that. I'm just trying to help prepare you for it. Speaking of godly denizens, and I feel like you're almost moving towards my next question, which I don't want to jump to just yet. Who or what, if anything, did the denizens of Luminias worship?
Nothing. Worship wasn't an important concept to them.
They didn't. Just to clarify, not that they didn't value the sovereigns or a god of any kind, but when they weren't creating, they didn't have any like ceremonies or rites or anything that they thought brought anything extra to their civilization, or were they very much in
They
power of their own
they
destinies kind of
were
a thing?
gods. Like, for all intents and purposes, the people in this world were gods, and they didn't need gods of their own. I don't think they cared about the sovereigns at all. Like, they might have from a sense of curiosity, or just, hey, I want to go hang out with these entities, but the sovereigns didn't really bother with the Dawn Children. The sovereigns were in charge of running the server and making sure things were still ticking. They weren't like,
Yeah, they were admins, like we talked
yeah,
about.
they were just adminning, and they wanted it to be low maintenance. They're like, everything's
They were
running
mods, they
itself.
were Discord mods.
Yeah, and they're
in
like,
this crazy, place.
but they're also part of the system, right? It's like they were the substance that was being used because the sovereigns are the elements. So they didn't have to do anything except vibe.
Yeah,
And if that's the case, like, an individual child of dawn might do some sort of rite because they think fire is beautiful, right? But it was and they might have had rituals, but it was all stuff that they made up because they thought it was neat. They didn't need to invoke a higher power. You don't need to invoke a higher power when you are immortal and you can shape the world around you, all that crap. Like, what need do you have for that stuff?
yeah.
Except
Probably more
creative
so
expression.
reverence if you were into a thing, less
Yeah.
than straight up like, oh, I have to wake up 8 a.m. and go pray to Sin, or else I won't be able to do this, that, or the other.
Yeah, and reverence in the sense of appreciation, this sense of like,
respect.
hey, this world is good, and I'm glad that it exists, and the elements are the world, so I vibe with that. I appreciate that. I'm going to express my appreciation in the form of an interpretive dance, because that's the thing that mind number 3,000,075, like to do.
That's my thing.
That's my thing.
I think that you were moving towards this with talking about those legendary creatures or inhabitants within the Dawn. But who were the important figures or legendary figures within Luminias?
Well, only 2 names have really passed on, for a number of reasons. I do want to come out from behind the curtain and say that Ioth, the great elven archmage, the great Alfar archmage, is one of the people who remembers Luminias. One of the few people who remembers Luminias. Because these Dawn children, when the Dawn was unraveled and woven into the 4 kingdoms, had to pick forms for themselves. Somewhat permanent forms. A lot of them became Fae. A lot of them became various other forms of spirits. Some of them became the elves. So the elves have a strong connection, not necessarily to Luminias, but at least to the Dawn Children, because it's not like Luminias was the only thing going on. It was just the biggest. And so the Alfar elves have a very strong cultural connection to Luminias. They remember, or at least they tell stories about its glory. By the time our adventure takes place in Quest for the Book of Dawn, I don't know if any of them are alive who actually were there in Luminias.
That was my next question. Okay, so they remember the stories or the legends, but they weren't present. There was probably nobody aside from the sovereigns or any of those important figures that kept a level of their divinity that even remember.
Yeah. Very few entities. There could be Archfey. Certain Archfey might, stem from back then. The thing is, being in this new form changes your memory. For a lot of them, the glories of the Dawn are like a dream or like a past life.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I see what O.W. Bolo is talking about. Ioth was briefly resuscitated in
as Alan O'Dale, yes, I recall.
In Arc 3 of Book of Dawn, but has since gone back to the afterlife. So the present tense is, I would say, it's no longer applicable. Ioth is once again quite dead.
But so what about the elementals?
For the elementals, I think if you're going to talk about other entities that would remember the Dawn, genies, certain genies would remember the Dawn.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Maybe not all of them, but like particularly powerful and old ones would remember the Dawn. I think that because genies sort of have this function in the world, most of them don't get too hung up on nostalgia. The Alfar are extremely nostalgic for the Dawn. But a lot of the Archfey elementals, when they chose their new form, they chose the form based on something they loved about the world, or they were already hard-coded into the system and therefore they have a function. And whatever that function is, like for the elementals, for the genies, regulating the world, maintaining the emerald tablets, educating mortals, They're like, yeah, sure, I was alive during the Dawn era, but like that was the job then, and this is the job now, and I'm not particularly hung up about how things have changed. I'm just, part of the system. I'm here to do
It's
my
kind of
thing.
like that scene in the movie where you have the kung fu master that the young student is like, oh, but you were there. You were there when the tablets were created and when the denizens did this, that, and the other. It's like, yes, but it's not important right now. Wash on, wash off, or
Exactly.
whatever.
Get back to your training.
Yeah,
That is
yeah,
a silly story for silly students.
yeah.
Today we have problems. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But aside from that, and it's really hard to say because people changed so much when they left the Dawn and they took on real bodies, that they, in a lot of ways, who they became is not who they were before.
Yes.
So there aren't a lot of direct one-to-one, I was there 10,000 years ago. Like, yeah, they were, but if we're talking about denizens of Luminias, there are two names that have survived in song and legend, Barash and Loetne. Barash was one of the great warriors, like warrior poet, creative fighters. And Loetne was, in the original lore, she was a high priestess, but there aren't really high priestesses anymore. There aren't really priests or clerics anymore. And gender was a very, very loose idea since nobody, biological reproduction was not a thing at the time. So you just sort of were you, whoever you chose to be at the time. But Barash was this incredibly powerful, like the champion of champions, the Leviathan hunter, the mountain climber, the sparrer extraordinaire, just the epitome of the arts martial, not necessarily, hand-to-hand physical combat, but just like fighting. And Lotne was this leader absolutely everyone looked up to. Empathic, wise, really good at negotiating interpersonal conflicts, very powerfully creative, just unto themselves, and a true leader and thought leader amongst the people of the Dawn. There were lots of others who were also incredibly important figures, but maybe their names are remembered in some Alfar songs here or there, but there's not a lot of those left.
Yeah. Which, like you said, the mainstay is because it's been so long, and anybody who was there, it almost, in a way, kind of feels like, how we discussed in the last episode about Dream, and it wasn't really part of the plan, but it ended up coming anyway. It almost feels like we've kind of stumbled on a possibility where all of those entities that then took on a mortal form, they were effectively gods before, and they had to take on a level of mortality when they came to Anacra, that possibly that mind that you taught us, that psyche, that what they once were was kind of translated, and just the fog that left them kind of went away and became this other realm.
Yeah, it's not one-to-one where
kingdom.
like, oh, the rest of your mind, which is now its own separate thinking entity, went to Dream. It's like, no, all the other things that didn't make the jump, all the concepts that could not be translated, all the potential, etc., that now that matter and thought are no longer bound together. That, I really like that, Matt. I think we're going to do that.
Write that down. Yeah, no, I think that makes a hell of a lot of sense now that we're talking about it.
That would also explain where a lot of weird dreams that don't come from your own head come from. It's the background radiation from the Dawn era.
Absolutely. And I think it makes sense why. And again, if we sat down and really did more on this, it's been a long time since you and I, especially you, were putting a hell of a lot of work into this Dawn era, considering we've been working on Anacra for so long. But characters like Barash and Luetne, there are likely more like them, and there were probably many, many more like them in Luminias. But like you said, these are probably one of the only few figures that, beyond that transition, their names are still ring out and are able to be known. Again, not by everyone, very, very particular people, where if they cross-reference plenty of ancient fae spirits and otherwise, maybe even the sovereigns themselves, and there's likely a reason why they were remembered, correct? A very climactic event that took place, why they went down in history.
Yep. The reason why Barash and Lotne are remembered is because there's an ancient song amongst the Alfar about the Fall of Luminias, and their names are in it.
That's the name of the movie.
That's the name of the movie. Right. So we've mentioned a lot how the Dawn Era came to an end because the Infernals were attracted to the world of Anacra. They saw this world where, oh my god, you can do stuff just by thinking. It's like Dream, but reality. Let's go fuck it up. And they rolled out from, and the Infernals, again, they're sort of a coalition of archfiends from various worlds who were either, they wept for there were no more worlds to conquer and they wanted to go on a new project, or they were exiled, or they're like, I'm kind of small potatoes here. I'd like to go start a new project where I can colonize the crap out of them and then I can be big potatoes over there. Whatever the case is, they found Anacra and they arrived in Anacra, and they had a completely different methodology. The Children of the Dawn were like, oh, we disagree? We're going to have this huge bombastic mind battle in order to, I will defeat you in the marketplace of ideas sort of thing. Whereas the Infernals are like, I'm going to kill you now, okay? They were just practical, deadly, it's the Red Queen hypothesis, where in nature, if you have two populations of organisms, one of which is sort of used to a very nurturing, life-friendly environment, and the other population of organisms is from an environment of constant hardship and struggle to survive, and you introduce those populations to each other, a bad thing is going to happen to one of those populations. Now, when they realized that this was going on, like the Children of the Dawn, they weren't just, oh, alas, our innocent minds cannot comprehend this horror. Like, they figured it out pretty quick. There was a lot of violence and a lot of slaughter and horror and trauma amongst them, but then they quickly moved into, well, this is our house and we are gods, and so if that's how it's going to be, that's how it's going to be, which set off this huge war between the Infernals and the Children of the Dawn, a war in which Luminias was the bastion, the primary centerpiece of organized resistance and defense against the Infernals. As the largest civilization of the Children of the Dawn, it immediately drew the attention of the Infernals, and it became the epicenter where all the greatest minds of the Dawn met to coordinate defenses and come up with new war arts. Like, they had to invent a bunch of new stuff that they hadn't invented before. They didn't have organized combat. They didn't have, military tactics. They didn't really have a lot of...
They didn't even know anything about armies at all.
Yeah, they didn't know anything about armies, and they never really fought with armies. It was always like champions, they just, we're gonna send out our champions into battle because we're gods.
It was like Dynasty Warriors, but like in the Dawn Era.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
You have Uzul, which is like Lubu, and just tons of just spawning
approach Uzul.
Beings. Exactly. And then you just send out Barash, aka Zhao Yun, to just start paving his way through.
Precisely. So the Infernals got a lot of ground initially when they arrived, and ground is very loosey-goosey. One thing I do want to say is that the Dawn Era was not an infinite world. It did not have literally infinite resources, but it had more than enough. And because there was no biological imperative to reproduce and spread and all that stuff, like, it was fine. It was hugely abundant. It's like, yeah, technically a Minecraft world has a maximum size, but you'll never find.
Yeah.
No. And then the Infernals roll up and they're like, yep, we are going to branch mine everything. We are just going to take all of this stuff. And that was another reason why the Infernals got an early advantage, is because they were all about extracting and maximizing value from whatever they took. And they were able to make new soldiers and new monsters and new fiends out of the substance of Dawn, and new weapons. So they arrived and they just started eating it and consuming it and transforming it and mercilessly slaughtering anyone who got in their way. And so when they initially invaded, they just wiped out. They just took over so much. It was a disaster. But then as soon as Barash and Lotne were the ones who really put together the strategy. Lotne was the one who, was a badass in their own right. Would sit in a tower in Luminias and just do 10th level magic effectively. The 10th level magic equivalent of just absolutely controlling the battlefield. And Barash would go out into the field and just destroy everything in their path. The two of them had an incredibly strong bond. We would recognize it as a romantic bond in our day, but at the time, like, that was a designation that barely had any meaning. So they just had a very, very strong, intimate connection between the two of them. They were always had each other's back. Barash was injured in the initial battle. Lotne healed them back up. They were incredibly loyal to each other. It's a love story of the gods, essentially.
Yeah.
And together, they trained the rest of the Children of Dawn. They repurposed Luminias to be this like death station of lasers and sound waves of destruction and elemental annihilation that the Infernals would attack and get slaughtered and attack and get slaughtered. There was nothing they could do about it, because once the Children of Dawn had these leaders and they actually applied their minds to brutal conflict, they were really good at it.
Yeah.
Not all of them, but especially the ones at Luminias, because they were able to exchange those ideas amongst themselves. So,
which likely was the thoughts of the encroaching Infernals, that if they could take Luminias, they took the Realm of Dawn.
Yeah, exactly. That was their whole idea, is we can, these Children of Dawn are really powerful, but the more we devour, the more light of dawn we consume, the stronger we ourselves become. Like, we're going to pump up our stats. We're going to get more magical artifacts and more creatures. Like, we can one-on-one, we can ambush these creatures and defeat them, but when they're organized, they are scary as hell. So Uzul was, when the Infernals arrived, they didn't have a strict pecking order amongst themselves. It was like all these different, it was like gathering a war horde together, right? This person shows up and they bring their armies and their inventions and their magic, and this person shows up and we're all sitting in the tent together, but there's no great Khan, there's no war chief at first. Uzul is the one who stepped up and took that role, because Uzul's whole portfolio is about conquest and domination and tyranny. So while they wouldn't recognize Uzul as like their lawful king or their governmental ruler, he was the leader of the fiends in battle.
He was for sure the general.
He was absolutely the general.
Even if he wasn't the ruler, he was for sure the pecking order general.
Yes. So in matters of war, during this time, Uzul was the top dog amongst all the Infernals. But as attack after attack after attack after attack against Luminias just failed and failed and failed and failed and failed, the rest of the Infernals started whispering behind his back, and they started complaining about a lack of results, and they started plotting against him. They started trying to come up with ways to circumvent him. And Uzul could feel his control of the situation eroding, and his power and his ego was massively threatened. So,
dude, what isn't Uzul's power and ego threatened?
I mean, that's sort of his whole shtick, right? Bullies and tyrants, if they ever feel weak, their whole sense of identity crumbles. That's one of Uzul's great, it's what he's basically a god of, is ego in a lot of ways.
He's like a mountain of ego. Like, you have like the rising of like, okay, we're doing good. My 15 minutes of yes, it's amazing. And now, no, don't insult me. I can do this. Stop.
But so Uzul thought about this and kept coming up with different strategies, and all of his strategies, like they came to Anacra because the world was divinely morphic and they could do whatever they wanted with it, but they didn't really have battle strategies for dealing with an entire native population who grew up in a place like this.
Yeah.
They thought they would be able to move in and just be like, haha, you are innocent life forms who are not used to warfare, prepared to die. So now they're getting their asses handed to him. So Uzul went to an Infernal who everyone else was scared of. There are, I would say, 2 Infernals, less so now, but at the time there were 2 Infernals that everyone else was afraid of because they were so unpredictable and so cruel and hateful. One of those is the Grey Jester, who is very unpredictable because all the Grey Jester wants to do is to make a mockery out of everything. And you never know if you're going to be up next, even if you're an Infernal. And then you had the Scorpion, Nephastus. And Nephastus was an Infernal of hatred. Just pure hate. Not even spite, just loathing. Absolute hatred of everything. A lot of the Infernals brought with them their armies, their servants, their courts, all this stuff. Nephastus came alone, because Nephastus hated everyone and would not abide by the presence of anyone else. When they arrived, and Nephastus was just sort of there with the whole group, and everyone was kind of too afraid to tell him, sorry, you can't sit with us. And they thought
He's
he
at
might
the end of the table.
exactly. And so the rest of the Infernals tolerated his presence because he was scary. Maybe he could be useful, but also because everyone was too afraid to tell him no. But when they arrived at Anacra, Nephastus really didn't, sort of went off and did his own thing, which was primarily torment, but not on a large scale, on a very personal, petty, cruel scale.
I take it back. Uzul was not Lubu. Nephastus was Lubu.
So Uzul couldn't crack Luminias and went to go talk to the Scorpion, Nephastus. And Nephastus came up with his own plan, because at first Nephastus did not care. Was like, I don't care about this. This is your problem. I hate you too, pal. I hate the Infernals. I hate you. I hope you fail. And I hope all the Dawn children fail. And I hope all of you die horribly. And then Uzul told Nephastus about Barash and Lotne. And Nephastus immediately wanted to destroy them, because they had something beautiful. They had something that they cherished. They had each other. And Nephastus hated that. And so Uzul essentially got Nephastus on board by promising him the opportunity to destroy this powerful bond between these two creatures of light. So Nephastus came up with this plan that Uzul and the other Infernals went along with, where they knew they weren't going to be able to beat Barash or Lotne. But they lured Barash out beyond the city of Luminias, and then hit him with this scary, like, Uzul in person crazy ambush. And Barash survived, because Barash was an absolute warrior god badass, but severely injured. It was enough focused fire that even though they knew it wouldn't kill him, they knew that it would injure Barash badly. But more importantly, Nephastus planted a thought, spread news back to Luminias that Barash was dead. And planted the seeds of sorrow, doubt, and despair in Lotne and the rest of the defenders back there.
And because Barash was so weakened, not destroyed, but at least temporarily defeated, he wasn't able to contest these rumors, at least for a time.
Right. And so this also greatly disheartened the rest of the Children of Dawn throughout the entire area. And this gave Nephastus then later lured Lotne away from the city with the promise of they're going to basically desecrate Barash, what's left of Barash. He's not even dead. Barash is imprisoned and being tormented in this horrible, horrible situation. So they lured Lotne away and then sprang a similar ambush. So now the two of them were gravely injured, and they led each of them to believe that the other was dead. And this actually ended up this is the final stroke that actually killed Barash, because as long as they had their bond, Barash basically refused to die. And as a creature of will, that worked. But then when they sprang the same ambush on Lotne, and Nephastus convinced Barash that Lotne was dead, Barash died and faded. And then Lotne went berserk and just carved an absolute path of destruction right into the heart of the infernal armies. Went full god mode, unleashing torrents of destruction. And while those armies were being chewed up, they invaded and wiped out and burned and devoured the light of Luminias. And then as Lotne arrived essentially at the heart of the Infernals' camp, Nephastus popped up and said, "Oh, hey, surprise! Actually, you've been lied to this whole time. Take a look behind you. Your city's dead. Everything you fought for is dead. Oh, and Barash is, he thought you were dead, and that's why he's dead. And look, I have all that's left of him right here, dangle, dangle, dangle." And mocked her with the remnants of Barash's soul, essentially. This was a mistake. He had just angered one of the most powerful children of Dawn out there. And so Lotne poured all of her hatred and grief into a single strike and killed Nephastus. It didn't take. Some other bad stuff happened. We'll talk about that in a future episode. Essentially, Lotne became just an incarnation of rage, wrath. Barash was pure sorrow. He just, given up by and broken by all that he'd seen and experienced by the knowledge that Lotne was dead. And Nephastus was pure hatred. And that sort of alchemically merged in a story for another time to form despair. Nephastus is gone, but there is a new Infernal, the Herald, Despair's Herald, that rose out of this. And the Herald deserves its own thing, but because it was the amalgamation of these three entities into one, the Herald is a very odd and rogue Infernal. Sort of, you are on this council, but we do not grant you the rank of master thing going on. The Herald operates under its own agenda, sometimes cooperates with the other Infernals, but isn't bound by the same rules that bind the rest of the Infernals. Because when the Emerald Tablets were amended by Ramius, the Herald isn't really a fiend. The Herald doesn't fit nicely into the classification of all of their entities.
It's kind of this weird combination of god, undead, fiend. It's like more like a monstrosity, if anything else.
And their final battle occurred over the waters. Like the grief, the tears, the blood, and the sweat that was shed in that final battle would end up forming the basis for some of the rivers of the underworld that are used to purge the souls of the dead of their past lives. And so the body of this new entity was formed out of this blood, sweat, and tears, and it's this sort of crunching black ice, which means that the Herald is this undead, fiendish, infernal, bad mojo sort of thing altogether.
Yeah. It might even be an elemental.
Yeah, it's like elemental, fiend, undead, hodgepodge.
Yeah.
To bring this all to a close, because Uzul was able to successfully use this opening to destroy Luminias, the Fall of Luminias is mostly about Barash and Lotne, their bond, their downfall, and there's a little bit in there about what actually befell the city, but the fiends sacked it, and it didn't have any physical belongings because the world was morphic, so they destroyed all the creative works there. They devoured them, desecrated them, made them their own, extinguished the light of Luminias, which faded from the world forever. That was the last straw. When that happened, organized resistance against the Infernals broke. It was gone. They destroyed the epicenter. And so now, once they took Luminias, not only did they become more powerful by consuming the denizens and creations of that place, but now there was no one to stop them. So they just started spreading and devouring the rest of the Dawn world and morphing it into whatever they wanted, which was
when the panic. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, you're about to say it. That's when the laughing god hit the oh shit button, and that's why the gates of the Silent City opened. Charlatan and friends wreaked annihilation across the world, and the firmament was ultimately created.
It almost seems like, in a way, after the Fall of Luminias, the Dawn world itself was almost not destroyed, but tainted. And after the dragons from the world before caused so much rampant destruction and chaos, it kind of needed a hard reset. Like, they needed to create the firmament to stop a lot of things, but also this paradise was kind of ruined and needed to be cleansed.
Yeah, the Infernals, it's like in Zelda where you have the golden world that became the dark world, and then they just unleashed dragons on it to wipe out the dark world. And so you still had the building blocks there, but it had been absolutely thrown back in the furnace and cooked. And so at this point, the only way to salvage it was to break it down into its base components and create something new out of it that was going to protect the world from this crap happening again.
And then when you had the inception, which we'll go over in a next episode, with the inception of the new Anacra, with the new mortal realm, you have this you kind of had it, like you said, blasted back to the Stone Age in a way, but it's kind of like Stone Age plus. You would find, like we said, not everywhere, but there would be certain monuments that would be carryovers from the Dawn realm, where you would have
Mhm.
these impressively high, amazing mountains. You would have in crossing points, these floating cities that would be remnants of the past. You would have these great beasts, such as the Tarjay or others, that still inhabited either the actual mortal realm or others that could then go through the crossing points. But regardless of where you ended up, what kind of life you chose, whether taking a fully mortal form or taking kind of some weird hybrid and either ending up in the other world or the overworld or even the underworld, all of these great wonders, or at least most of them, fragments of them, carried over and could be found either in one of the other worlds or still roaming or a ruin of it in the mortal realm. And you kind of had this new game plus in a way where you could still have this world of adventure and intrigue and creativity. And the sovereigns then took a much more impressive and diligent look over everything. And I feel like when we go from Dawn to the new realm, the Laughing God takes a far less. He already wasn't super involved, but once he did the panic button, he kind of almost checked out and just
Mhm.
was making sure that he resided within his realm and just left the sovereigns and their children to really take care of things.
That was always the plan. The Laughing God is the person who gets the job and never wanted the job. Like,
Yeah,
you're the Dionysus of the old pantheon, and now suddenly you're the Lord of all creation. Like, I don't want this responsibility.
yeah,
I'll be the chairman of the board, but like somebody else CEO, please. Uh, and I think that a lot of the remnants of the Dawn world, most of them are not actual one for one. This piece of the Dawn made it into this
no,
world. It's more like echoes, right? The same
yes,
ideas and concepts were recreated because they were still part of the fabric of this world. When we talk about pockets of Dawn, what we're talking about are actual surviving bits of that proto Dawn energy that is telepathically morphic. But usually you're not going to have like, well, this stuff, because that stuff was so easily shaped, right? If somebody made something and then stopped paying attention to it, stopped loving it, stopped caring about it, you could come across and turn that into something else because their will was no longer on it. So most
yeah,
of the Dawn remnants that survived are in that proto matter form, and they're
yeah,
not really artifacts of old because whatever they are, they've reverted to their core state. There are some exceptions. There are a
yeah,
few exceptions, but they're very rare.
absolutely. Well, was there anything else you thought we needed to cover about the Fall of Luminias, mate?
No, I think we did a good job. I'm excited to talk about like the Silent City and other stuff. And I think the Fall of Luminius is something that gets referenced a lot. It's sort of in the background of a lot of lore, and it hasn't really taken a forward step in Quest for the Book of Dawn nearly as much as the Silent City has, for example. But you'll see the after effects of the Fall of Luminius across the entire world and across all of history.
Well, that is very fortuitous because next on the docket will be the Silent City. So we can look forward to
Excellent.
delving into that next episode.
Very good. We're probably going to have to talk about the silence a little bit. We'll obviously talk about
Oh, yeah.
dragons. You know,
So
effing
much.
dragons. How do they work?
How do they work?
Yeah. But thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, Matt, as always, for being my excellent co-host and co-creator of the world. And until next week, take care.